So welcome to episode 13 in my endeavor and quest to find a way to get the audio quality up to something that YouTube considers to be acceptable. Um, Today, what I want to do is talk about the question of technological unemployment and to see if we can actually make sense of the question of whether or not this time is different. Um, it seems that for a very long time, several centuries at least, there's been a tension between one perspective that technology is dangerous and harmful in the specific sense that it puts people out of work, and another perspective that technology is helpful and generative in the specific sense that it generates more wealth and that the people who are put out of work when their skills are rendered obsolete are able to retrain and find new things to do. Broadly speaking, while it is certainly the case that for the specific individuals who are put out of work and put out of vocation, the experience has been unpleasant, society as a whole has figured out how to overcome the dire prophecies and has consistently been able to figure out a way to, in fact, actually continually keep most of the population more or less gainfully employed for the past several hundred years. However, we once again find ourselves in a conversation about this, and what I'd like to consider is whether or not this time is different. And in order to do that, what I'd like to do is first um, figure out how to pose the question well. And in order to get there, we're going to need to articulate at least 6 different concepts. Fortunately, they're very closely related, so it's not actually going to be that hard. So on the one hand, what I will propose is a chain of concepts: skills, ability to learn, and capacity to increase your ability to learn. These are roughly similar to the classic chain of velocity, acceleration, and jerk in physics, which is to say that the greater your ability to learn, the more skills you can learn in the same period of time, or the more difficult skills you can learn in the same period of time. And the more your capacity to increase your ability to learn, this is the jerk parallel, the more you're able to change your ability to learn in time. Right? So it's the second derivative. And then in parallel, on the technology side of the equation, I might put tools, the capacity to innovate, and the capacity to increase your capacity to innovate. And I'm going to propose that these are roughly equivalent. They sort of march in lockstep. So then, given those concepts, what I would say is that first order, what we typically witness is a situation where a tool is innovated and has the ability to replace or obsolete some set of skills. Right? So the first thing is that a human being uses their learning, their ability to learn skills. And those skills are valuable in their society, and they go out and generate value. Human society uses its capacity to innovate to build tools. And as those tools have value, one of the things that they may do is they may obsolete or replace skills. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this does seem to be more or less a one-way direction, which is that tools replace skills. And once they've done that, those skills are no longer meaningfully valuable, at least not in the way that they used to be. So, for example, the chainsaw more or less permanently replaces the utility and the skill of being able to use that kind of long 3 or 5 man saw to cut down a big tree. Having skillfulness in that category is obsolete. And generally the way that society has responded to that is by, in fact, expanding the scope of the kinds of things for which one can be skillful. Right? So to use a historical example, let's say someone had skillfulness in harvesting wheat, and then the automated wheat harvester comes along that obsoletes that skill, that having that skill is no longer valuable. And yet, what ends up happening is that there emerges a new space for skills, a new opportunity to be skillful, which might be, for example, in repairing farm machinery, which didn't exist before farm machinery existed. So the human being then applies their capacity to learn to this new space of possible skillfulness, develops the skills, and then now has a new valuable skill. So this is essentially the dynamic. We have a dynamic where you have a space of possible skillfulness. You have a capacity to learn, which relates to that space, which is the degree to which one can then go into and actually acquire and develop those skills in a time frame that is valid. And then we have the innovation, which is the ability to generate tools that expands and fills the space of possible skillfulness. So it's sort of like a circle of possible skillfulness, and then a circle inside of it, which is the space of obsoleted skillfulness that is being replaced by tools. Okay, so first order, the conflict appears to be at the conflict between tools and skills. But I think pretty quickly we can recognize that the actual conflict is higher in the stack. And this is where we're beginning to get into the real space of what's happening now. That for a very long period of time, human beings' capacity to learn was much, much higher than society's capacity to innovate, which is to say that as the space of possibilities of skills expanded, individual human beings' capacity to learn meant that they could come into and develop skillfulness at a rate that was much faster than technology, than innovation's ability to fill that space. So we've had kind of a balance where once technology has obsoleted a certain possibility of skillfulness, it's done, but that as long as the sphere of possibility of skillfulness has been expanding, humanity's capacity to learn has enabled human beings to learn and adapt that new possibility of skillfulness outside of the sphere, the advancing sphere of technology, and then remain in a position of being able to create value. So then we find ourselves faced with the principal problematic, and it comes from two different directions. One direction is the question of what is the relationship between the capacity to learn and the capacity to innovate? Because now we can talk about that second derivative, which is the capacity to increase your capacity to learn and the capacity to increase your capacity to innovate. And here's where we notice the first major problem. Human beings tend to be, as so far at least, relatively limited in that second order, which is to say that evolution has gifted us with a very large ambient capacity to learn. But it's not quite clear exactly how much our capacity to increase our capacity to learn is. There seems to be some relatively narrow band that a contemporary human being may in fact have more or less the same capacity to learn as a Stone Age's human being. We have more to learn, and we have more skills and different skills to learn, but the capacity to learn may in fact not have changed that much. By contrast, the capacity to innovate seems to be vastly more flexible, and our capacity to innovate seems to have increased quite dramatically. And so while the relationship between capacity to innovate and capacity to learn may have for a very long period of time, the grand totality of all of history, have been decisively in the favor of human beings, we now may be reaching a crossover point where the capacity to innovate is now reaching and potentially exceeding the capacity to learn. And what we might think about is to think about these circles. There's the outside circle is the expanding circumference of the opportunity for skillfulness, the kinds of things that could be done to add value. Then there's a circle, which is the expanding ability to be skillful, which is the capacity to learn applied to build skills among human beings. And then the inner circle is the expanding generation of tools, the innovation of tools that replaces human beings' capacity. And the relationship that I'm focusing on right now is the rate between circle 2 and circle 3. Right? So if circle 2 is expanding slower than circle 3, then at some point circle 3 will in fact reach and exceed circle 2. All right? So that's one dimension. And this is fundamentally anchored in that second derivative, which is the capacity to increase the capacity. And so we can ask some questions, which is, well, what is the capacity to increase the capacity of learning? To what degree have we explored that question? How much do we know about it? What is it right now already? Like, are we doing a good job at focusing our energies on increasing the capacity to learn? And then secondarily, to what degree is there a way to apply the capacity to innovate back on the capacity to learn so that our machines are helping us overcome the constraints of our machines? I think the answer to that is we don't really know. This is not something that we have a lot of wisdom or deep experience in thus far. But at least we now understand what the question is, right? It's not obvious that the experience of the past, which was based upon the fact that the relationship between that second circle and the third circle was one where the second circle had a higher capacity to grow. So long as the first circle expanded, the second circle had territory into which to grow and had time to do it before the center circle could reach up and connect with it. And the question of the present moment is that relationship the same? Or is our capacity to innovate simply higher than our capacity to learn? Is our capacity to increase our capacity to innovate simply higher than our capacity to increase our capacity to learn? And if it is, then for sure, that center circle is going to race out and completely occupy the entire possibility of skillfulness, and there will be no value in human skills. So that's that. Now, the other side of it, which is also interesting, and has kind of been the subject of, frankly, the debate thus far, is the relationship between the first circle and the second and third. Meaning, well, at what pace is there an increase in the size of the possibility of skillfulness? So far, we've been in a situation where when we have removed a particular valued skill, like harvesting wheat, we have also generated, in fact, generatively quite substantially, like the circumference has increased and therefore the surface area has increased at a higher rate. New possibilities. So that first circle has continued to expand, even as the third circle has expanded. But is there any principled reason to believe that that will continue to be the case? Is there literally any principled reason to believe or understand how and what the relationship is between the expansion of tools and the possibility of human skillfulness? Again, I don't think we know. History has told us that, so far at least, every time that we've built new tools, we have also built new possibilities of human skillfulness. But that's just history. It may be that we're reaching the end of that curve for reasons that we don't actually understand. So I guess the point here is that, from my perspective, we don't really have any clarity on this question. Or at least we don't have the ability to generate answers with clarity. But hopefully this particular presentation has at least made it a well-formed question. And we can now potentially take a closer look at the question and maybe be in a position to actually make some good choices around it.